Welcome back, everyone. Rabbi Ken Spiro from Israel. Welcome back.
Always good to be back.
Amazing. You are in the middle of Hanukkah in Jerusalem, which is pretty cool.
Oh, the last night we got all the lights lit. Thankfully, there
Amazing.
actually are not the external tourists, but there's a lot of Israelis in Jerusalem.
So cool. Yeah. And the donuts, are they at par this year? Have they been meeting your expectations?
Donuts are awesome. I've been controlling myself, and I took out a second mortgage to pay for a few of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those places are incredible and incredibly expensive. So amazing.
Exactly.
The land of the gourmet donut. That's how we're going to refer to Israel going forward. All right, so today we are going into um, a current topic. Um, we're going to talk about Turkey. So, Turkey, how it relates to Syria, because there's a relationship between the fall of Syria, which we're in the midst of right now, and the land of Turkey. So, I think most people don't completely understand that connection. They get mentioned in the same breath, but no one really knows how that fits. So, and Turkey is a part of the entire region that we're always speaking about in the Middle East. Actually, I'm curious, is Turkey part of the Middle East? How do we relate to it? And where should we begin?
So Turkey, that's a great question. Geography plays a huge role in history, just as Israel is the land bridge between Africa and everywhere else in the world. Turkey is the land bridge that connects Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Turkey is actually not part of the Middle East or the Levant that we talked about previously when we talked about Syria. Turkey is part of what's called Anatolia, which is a little like if you look at a map, and I know most of our listeners are probably not super familiar with geography, especially of that part of the world, but the jutting out of the end of Asia is this like little peninsula, which is Anatolia, which is the westernmost part of Asia. And most of the peoples who have been involved in the history of Turkey, with some very notable exceptions coming from Europe, are people who are Asiatic peoples who migrated into this piece of part of the world, which is very being being where it is geographically. A lot of people migrate through it. That's the downside of being in a central location. Turkey sits on one of the most important land bridges. Besides being the roadway that comes from Asia into the Middle East, it also, if you head up, like make a right turn as you're coming from Asia, going through what is today modern day Turkey, you hit the waterway called the Bosporus, which crosses into Europe. And that connects the Black Sea to the Aegean Sea. The Aegean is just the eastern part of the Mediterranean to the right of Greece, to the east of Greece. So that is one very, very, very important piece of real estate that a lot of wars have been fought around controlling that territory. As a matter of fact, if you go to Istanbul today, I mean Ankara is the official capital, but Istanbul is the real big city. It's the largest city in Europe. I think it's got like 15, half 16 million people living in it. As you cross the bridge, one side of the bridge is called the European side, one side's the Asian side. So it
Yeah,
really
it
is its
seems like
own
that would be
kind of.
an incredibly strategic position for any, world power to somehow have either control over or at least a vested interest in. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And because it's kind of right in the middle of everything, which is a blessing and a curse, the big blessing is for trade. It's similar to Israel, where the big middlemen of bringing God into the world and being the middlemen of trade. But everyone invades us. Everyone conquers us. So the history of Turkey in many ways is similar to the history of Israel in terms of the ancient world of who passes through and who controls and who conquers. And there's been a lot of different empires. So the history is quite long and pretty complicated.
Amazing. We love that. So where do we start? How do we
So
break it
let's
down
let's
so we
let's do
can
like a
cover
quick.
thousands of years in less than an hour?
Exactly, exactly. I'll talk even faster. Oh no. Um, since this is remember what's next, we gotta going back to the past, especially a certain period of time, really gives us a sense of what Turkey's up to now, and Erdogan, the current president of Turkey's into. But the beginning, the original people of Turkey are the Hittites, the Hittian people, who are originally a Western Asiatic people who migrated to that part of the world. There's an empire there. You find them fighting with the Egyptians going back thousands of years ago. It's one of the first major civilizations in that part of the world, and also one of the peoples that seemingly mentioned as one of the peoples inhabiting Israel before Joshua comes in, the Hittite, the Prizi, the Hittites, the Prizzites, the Jebusites. So their influence spreads all the way down into Levant, down into the Eastern Mediterranean. They're like, again, an Indo-European people. Their language is very different from languages of the Middle East, like Western Semitic languages, which is why I've been to Turkey multiple times. I cannot get one word of that language except teşekkür, which is thank you. I guess it's the most important word to know. That's the only Turkish word I've been able to learn, although a lot of foreign
Wow.
languages, a lot of Persian and Arabic words
Mm.
have crept into the language of today. But it becomes, if we fast forward, this is like 2,200 years ago. If we fast forward to, let's say, the 6th century BCE, it
Hmm.
becomes part of the Persian Empire. This is when Persia is that vastly expanding empire that invades the Greeks. The stories we know of, the Greeks fighting off the Persian invasion all take place around then. If we fast forward to the 4th century, after Philip of Macedon unites Greece, his son Alexander in 333 approximately BCE embarks on the greatest military campaign in all of human history, taking his 10,000 men for more than a decade campaigning and getting all the way out to Afghanistan, which is the graveyard of all empires. I think he
Wow.
fights 22 battles, never loses one, but his men burn out, and he dies in 323 at the age of 33, I believe, having conquered the entire Persian Empire, which is an amazing feat, which at the time is what is Turkey of today. So there's a very strong, that's the original like European invasion into the East, which creates this Hellenistic civilization that reaches all the way down to Egypt. When Alexander the Great dies, his empire divides into big chunks, and what is Turkey of today becomes part of what's called, most of it becomes part of what's called the Seleucid Greek Empire, which is initially led by one of Alexander's generals, Seleucus, who all the kings who come after are called Antiochus or Antiochus. And since we're in the last night of Hanukkah, it's
Right.
Antiochus the fourth of the Seleucid Empire, who is ruling out of the area of east, what is basically Syria and to the east and north. That is our nemesis in the Hanukkah story that we're celebrating now. And then we know the emerging world power is Rome. So the Romans come along and they're already interfering in Turkey in the 2nd century before the Common Era, but just around the same time as Pompey Magnus will absorb Israel in 63 BCE into the Roman Empire. Right around then, what is today Turkey becomes part of the Roman Empire, and they're always butting heads with the Persian Empire that's to the east. They're never able to conquer. There's always some Persian Empire there. Today it's Iran.
So
but
what's the religious makeup of that of Turkey at that point, and what is it called?
so
And because religion plays such a huge part in the Middle East, how are we viewing that? Is Islam, I think, hasn't come along yet. So what's going on there in terms of religion?
right. So at this period of time, you have when a good part of what is Turkey is part of the Roman Empire. It's a mushmash of people. Remember, the Romans are unsettling vast numbers of people in there. So it's a mushmash of the previous people who've inhabited the area. The religion of Persia is traditionally mostly Zoroastrianism, which is this dualistic faith that goes back to the first century before the Common Era of the god of light, Ahura Mazda, and Ahiram, the god of darkness, and the Mithraism. There's a number of different religious faiths there. But that's the Roman occupation of that empire. And we know that in the 4th century of the Common Era, we're fast forwarding through this really fast,
Hmm.
when Rome is still a pretty big empire, because Pax Romana is really the peak of the Roman Empire is a little bit before that, when it controls the entire Mediterranean. In we During the time of Constantine the Great, in 330 CE, Common Era, the Roman Empire will split, and Constantine will make what's called Constantinople, which is today Istanbul, the capital. There's basically two Roman empires. There's a Latin-speaking empire, which is based in Rome, which is the initial one, and the Eastern Roman Empire, which is Greek-speaking, which is based in Constantinople. Constantine himself he himself issues an edict of toleration in, I think it's 312 CE, where he stops persecuting the Christians because Christianity is already becoming a major world faith. And then in 324, he makes it the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Yeah,
He
I was going
himself
to
is not a
ask,
Christian.
isn't Constantine the one that converts, or was that somebody else?
Well, yeah. Is that famous? Roses are reddish, violets are bluish. If it wasn't for Constantine, we'd all be Jewish. It's not true, actually, but it's a good nursery rhyme. That's a whole other discussion of why Christianity succeeded where Judaism did not, in
Because it
terms
was
of becoming a
adopted by the
major
Roman
world.
Empire, basically.
Yeah, but also because it was much more adopted. It's much more easily adopted.
Right,
I mean,
right,
you try circumcising several million people.
right. Yeah, there's actually a fascinating interview that I heard recently with Tom Holland, who's a historian. He has a really well-known history podcast also. And he talks about that historically Christianity, it's exactly what you said, that it was so much that the people of the time loved the message that Judaism was bringing, right? That people, everyone's created in the image of God, that people, the sanctity of life, that these were so radical and new in the world in that time. But many, many people didn't want to do all the stuff that Jews had to do in order to be Jewish. And that Christianity really came along and provided an access in for those who wanted to have those values but didn't necessarily want to be bound to the practice in the same way. And that was fascinating. It really, affirms a lot of what I remember learning from you in terms of, they're so close together, but it really is kind of like a Judaism light, so to speak. Um,
Exactly. That's a very good summary. Exactly. We should do a podcast on that one. I don't know if we've ever done it,
mhm.
but it's a really interesting topic. But that Byzantine Empire, which is based is the Greek-speaking Eastern Empire, will be the empire that will rule what is basically the Ottoman Turkish Empire of today, the Turkish Empire, what is Turkey of today, and also all the way down to Israel. That's when the status of Jerusalem will change dramatically because then of the Christian influence, Jerusalem is no longer the destroyed capital of the most rebellious people in the Roman Empire. It is now, okay, destroyed, but it was the city where Jesus is arrested, tried, crucified, buried, and resurrected. So definitely, that's the Byzantine influence. Going back, by the way, to the Seljuks, who are another Turkish Western Asiatic people, will be pushing in. There's a lot of people migrating. The Mongols, the Huns, everyone's always migrating from the steppes in the east into the west and pushing on the gates of Europe and on the gates of Constantinople. They built these, it's called the Theodosian walls. Constantinople had this incredible defensive system. It's got its back to the water on one side, and it has a very heavily defended harbor and incredibly significant wall defenses that really held off foreign invasions for basically about 1,000 years. But the Seljuk Turks are going to be pushing in on the empire. By the way, in 1095, Pope Urban II in Clermont in France will declare the First Crusade to basically liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre Church, which had been burnt down to the ground and then rebuilt by the Muslims later, but also to the Eastern Empire had asked which was based in Constantinople, had asked the Western Roman Empire, which were now their nemesis, excuse me. They didn't like each other because about 1,000 years ago, over the issue of the primacy of the Pope, those churches will split. The Eastern Roman will be the Greek speaking, and then the Catholic Church will maintain its control of Western Europe, different language groups, different cultures. Constantinople was, by the way, much nicer. By the 5th century, 475, the Western Roman Empire ceases to exist.
Wow.
Rome is overrun by the Goths, but
Mm,
the church will be a major play. The major feudal player in Western Europe will be that Catholic Church, but the Eastern Church, which controls what is centered in what is Turkey, based in Constantinople, that's a gorgeous city, beautiful, like the
mhm.
largest domed structure in the world. Hagia Sophia is built there. You can see this building there today. Erdogan has turned it back into a mosque, but that is really the center of culture of Europe. Is really now moved to the Eastern Greek-speaking empire, which is getting pressure from the Seljuk Turks. The Crusaders go through, they march through, they come down to Israel, they slaughter the Jews, they take over Jerusalem. By the way, I think it's after the Fourth Crusade, in the middle of the 13th century, the Crusaders themselves will sack Constantinople and take it over, and they will rule it. So the Western Europeans will take it over. I think it's till about 1261 or something, is a short period of time.
So
But
at that point,
meanwhile,
it changes from Roman Christian rule to European Christian rule. Is that what you mean?
yeah, I mean, the center of the Eastern Church is still going to be there, but it's going to be dominated and controlled by a foreign occupying Western European crusading army. I think it's the First Crusade. It's called the
Mm.
Late Latin period, late Latin occupation. By the way, in the 10th century, if I'm not mistaken, This because Islam begins in 722. That's the year one when Muhammad flees from Mecca to Medina. That's when they start counting their calendar. In 638, Omar ibn al-Khattab, whose successors are the founders of the Umayyad dynasty, which is based in Damascus, will bring Islam to the Middle East and conquer Jerusalem. The square at Jaffa Gate is named after him. And at that point, that Islam will seep into what is the Anatolia and will be adopted by the Seljuk Turks. So now
Okay, so let
these,
me
now,
just let me just say
yeah.
it so just I remember. So what you're saying is after like there was already a crusade, so at that point Jerusalem is under Christian rule, and then uh Islamists come and conquer it at that point and take it over from Christian rule. Is that
Well, no,
correct?
that's okay. If we're going back to Israel, no, for the order you got a little out of order there. In the early seventh century, the Persians will overrun Jerusalem, and 12 years later, the Byzantines will reconquer it back again. And very shortly after that, I think it's 624 that Heraclius they reconquered Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken. I sometimes get some of my dates confused. But literally within 12 years or 14 years later, the the uh, the Umayyad dynasty, the Muslims coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, will conquer Jerusalem, and from then on, it will be under various Islamic, but not necessarily Arab, because like almost all Arabs are Muslims, but only 30% of Muslims are Arabs.
Okay.
Umayyads, Abbasids, Fatimids, Mamelukes, Seljuks, Ottomans. These are Turks, Seljuks and Ottomans. These are Turkish peoples. The longest period of time of control of Israel in the last, like 1500 years has been under the Turks, actually, the Ottoman Empire, which we haven't gotten to yet. So the Crusaders will come in the middle of to separate the early Islamic period, which is 1099, they conquered Jerusalem. The Muslims had gotten there in 638. And then in 1187, we're just back in Israel now, we're not talking about the Turks. After less than 100 years, when the Turks will have a kingdom, the Latin kingdom of the Crusaders based in Jerusalem, in less than 100 years, Saladin, whose family doctor was Maimonides, will reconquer the Holy Land from the Crusaders, who will have access to places after but never control it again. It's the only period of time when non-Muslims are controlling Israel and Jerusalem until the British show up in December 11th, 1917. Right. So the Seljuks will be the ones they bring the Islam to that part of the world. They don't take Constantinople, but in 1453, if we fast forward again to 1453, this is the emergence of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And this is where it really starts to intersect with Israel and the Jewish people much more. The role that Turkey plays is much bigger. And by the way, the Jewish presence in this part of the world is very ancient. It goes back to the time of Greek empires. It's way before this period of time. Jews have settled in the Roman Empire all around the Mediterranean. There were major Jewish populations in what is today Turkey way before it was Turkey, just as there were major Jewish populations in the entire Middle East and the Levant in today what are Arab Islamic countries way before any Arabs or Muslims had gotten there. We're talking like 1,000 years before. So there are Jewish populations there for sure that predate all this. Like Jura Europa, you can look, there's synagogues we find on the Eastern Mediterranean that are very, very old, that go back to the time of the Second Temple. But the Ottomans appear and they are become a major player. And in the 15th century, in 1453, after 1,000 years, and it's a great book, by the way, I forgot the author, but it's one of the best siege stories, using cannon for really using cannon effectively for the first time in modern siege warfare. The Ottomans will breach the walls of Constantinople and it will fall to it's Mehmed II, and is also called Fatih the Conqueror, which is an amazing story. After 1,000 years, that empire survived and now it's gone. And
Mm.
now we have established this is when the Turkic, Anatolian, Eastern Asiatic people will really come and settle. And this is primarily the dominant group of people who have been there ever since, even though the Ottoman Empire no longer survives. The height
And
of the Ottoman
that's
Empire,
in what year? Where are we now?
that's in 1453.
Got it. Okay.
That's in 14. And the Ottomans, now if we fast forward, by the way, less than 40 years later, what happens if you go across the other side of the world of Europe to Spain, as far as away as you can get, what started out as an outlier community at the end of the earth for the Jews when the Muslims conquered Spain in 711 and Jews followed along, will become by this period of time the largest Jewish community in the world. It's ironic how something like America 100 years ago was the outlier community, and then all these Jews pour in from Eastern Europe, and the whole demographic switches. The Holocaust, of course, helped, I'm saying that sarcastically, destroying the entire Eastern European Jewish community. So you can have very rapid changes in Jewish population in relatively short periods of time. But this is not a class on Jews in Spain, but between the 14th and 15th centuries, especially with the reconquest of Spain, that Jewish population suffers tremendous persecution in Castile in the 14th century. And then with the reunification of Spain in 1492 under Ferdinand and Isabella, the Jews are expelled. July 31st, 1492. They're given a choice, convert or get out. And probably about 150,000 Jews leave. And about 70,000 of them are going to, a lot of them go back to West North Africa, go back to Morocco. They overwhelm a lot of the more indigenous Jewish populations that had been there previously. They go to Italy, they go to Greece, and all of this is now part of the Ottoman Empire. Because if you look at where the Ottoman Empire gets to in the height of its expansion in the mid-17th century, it controls all of Eastern Europe. It controls Greece, it controls Bulgaria, the Balkans, Romania, Hungary, the Middle East, what is the Persian Empire, what is today Lebanon and Syria and Israel and Egypt. It goes down the Arabian Peninsula and goes all the way down to Yemen, controlling that a very important trade route, and gets all the way through North Africa. It becomes a very, very big empire. This is a little later, but
Where does
70.
where does the word Ottoman come from? Where do
That's a
they
good
get
question.
that
You know what?
name? Like,
That's a
it
good
seems like
question.
such an unusual name.
Ottomani, I don't, that's a good question. I gotta look, thank you for asking that. I probably knew that at some point and don't remember it. But like, where does the word Seljuk come from? I don't know.
I
It's
feel
probably
like
Dutch.
I get to move to the front of the class in the yeshiva because if I get a
Yeah,
question
yeah.
that stumps the
Stump
rabbi,
me.
I feel pretty good. But yeah,
One thing's
okay,
for sure,
yeah.
Ellie, as soon as this is over, I'm looking it up and I'm never going to forget it. People ask me, how do you
Amazing.
know so much stuff? I say, you know why? Because I have a good memory. I'm interested and I make an effort to learn it and I use it.
Right.
But whenever I come across a word I don't know or an idea in history I'm not familiar with, I immediately look it up. That's how you build
Awesome.
your knowledge. Anyway, um, so about 70,000 Jews will pour into what's called the Ottoman Empire, which is everything from Greece to the east, the Aegean, and everything from Israel all the way up through what is Lebanon and Syria. And Bayezid, the Sultan at the time, there's a quote said in his name. Now, whether he really said it or not, I don't know, but it really gives you a sense of what's going on. They say, they tell me Ferdinand of Spain, remember Ferdinand and Isabella of Castile and Aragon are the couple that unites in marriage and then reconquers Spain with the fall of Granada in 1492. So Bayezid says, they tell me Ferdinand of Spain is a wise man, but he's a fool, for he takes all of his treasure and sends it to me. And what was he talking about? He's talking about the Jews. And we know that it's a great, I think we must have talked about this topic multiple times. But as God says to Abraham, I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Um, when you invite Jews in and you let them do their thing, like they did in Spain under the Umayyads from the 8th to the 11th centuries, making that the most progressive, the greatest explosion of Islamic high culture, which was a great symbiotic relationship between the Jewish and Christian minority living with the Muslims there. Same thing happens in the Ottoman Empire, which is at the time pretty open and accepting of a lot of different minorities. And the Jews pour in, and Jews are great because we are multilingual people who all speak one common language. Some people think it's guilt. No, it's it's Hebrew, which is not the spoken language, but Jews could always communicate through Hebrew. This period of time, the Jewish world is switching, by the way, from being overwhelmingly Arabic-speaking and Sephardic Middle Eastern and Mizrahi Jews and Spanish Jews to now switching over with the expulsion to really moving into Europe and moving west from Europe into Eastern Europe, and the whole center of the Jewish world is now going to move to Eastern Europe. But it's a reseeding of a Jewish population that proves to be extremely beneficial because Jews who are literate and numerate, meaning we could read when most of the world was illiterate. The vast majority of people in the world up until only a few hundred years ago were illiterate. And numerate, meaning we could count, and smart. And also because we were not indigenous to anywhere we went, so we had no local loyalties to any piece of real estate, and had great trade connections spread out around the world, and had developed the trade along the Silk Road to the Far East. It was great for the Ottomans, and it's a perfect It's just, whether to prove that Jews are responsible for it, I'm not sure that you could do that so easily. It would be a great PhD thesis. But you notice an interesting pattern of the rise and fall of civilizations by how they treat the Jews. And they were good to us then, and that historically the Ottomans were pretty good to the Jews. And we see that the Ottoman Turkish Empire will reach the height of its empire by like 1683. They get to the gates of Vienna, Austria. They almost take the city. And this is under Selim and Suleiman the
Wow.
Magnificent. And he's the one in 16. Suleiman will rebuild the walls around Jerusalem in 1540. This is the height of the Ottoman Empire. Is the 16th to the 17th centuries is when they're expanding, expanding, expanding until today. The walls you see, I think at least there's like a dozen inscriptions around the wall praising Suleiman the Magnificent's building projects, which means Solomon, and by the way, in Arabic or Turkish language, ironically, since Solomon
Yeah,
built the first
fascinating.
temple in Jerusalem. But this is the greatest size of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. But like all empires, they go into contraction. And once we get to basically, the late 18th and 19th centuries, external pressure from expanding European powers, the British are nibbling here. The Russian Empire has been expanding dramatically, and they're trying to get their hold on, part like the Crimea, for instance, which Turkey at one point controlled. Now Russia has it again, and now the Ukrainians want it back, and everyone's fighting over this real estate because it's this little like piece of island that sticks out into the Black Sea. So in the middle of the 19th century, there will be a war that Russia will fight between for the middle 19th century, no, excuse me, is the Crimean War in the 1850s, where France, England, Turkey fight a war with Russia. Nothing ever changes. It's primarily to keep the Russians bottled up and keep them out of the Aegean and the Mediterranean. And that basically works. But then in the latter part of the 19th century, there's going to be, I think it's in 1877, there's the Russo-Turkish War. And the Ottomans lose the Crimea. And the Ottoman Empire is already like in a state of decline, like many empires, shrinking, 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 losing territory. It was this great empire shrinking, losing territory. They lose a lot of their control of places in the Middle East, like in Egypt and even in the land of Israel. Off and on, there's different people who break away and rebel. And by the time we get to the early 20th century, they're called the sick man of Europe. And they're basically being propped up by the British and the French to keep the Russians bottled up in the Black Sea, which the British consider the Mediterranean kind of their private little ocean. So there you see, there's the rise and fall. But if we skipped a very important date, by the way, because in post-expulsion of the Crusaders, you will have the Ayyubids. Saladin will liberate the Middle East from the Crusader influence primarily. And then you will have the Mamelukes, who are another interesting group of people, slave warriors from the Caucasus who will conquer much of the Middle East. They will stop the Mongols, and then they're like undefeatable until they are themselves defeated by the Ottomans. And the Ottomans will gobble up the Mamluk Empire. So from 1517, the Turks will come to what is the Middle East, the Levant, Syria, Israel, and take it over. So from 1517 until 1917, which corresponds to the Ottomans kind of being at the height of their power, and then somewhere in the middle there, towards the end, they wane in power. The Ottomans will be the final people who will be Islamic, not Arab, controllers of the Middle East. That's 500 years. Very convenient of them to round it off perfectly from 1517 to 1917. It's very easy to remember. And the final mistake that the Ottoman Empire makes, being very weak. It's at this period of time, by the way, if you go to Israel, when all the European powers are bullying the Ottomans around and they're all building stuff, post offices and hospitals and churches, and pushing the Turks to allow the Jews to build really big synagogues, which generally Muslims don't allow. You see them in the Jewish quarter today. You can see the rebuilt Horva and the Tifer Yisrael synagogue. But the fatal mistake the Ottoman Empire makes is to side with the central powers of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Germans in World War I from 1914 to 1918. And when they lose that war, just as the Austro-Hungarian Empire is ended by the victorious Allied powers, so too, and we've talked about this before for sure, the Ottoman Empire, we talked about this with Syria, is primarily between the British and the French. They take it over, and between basically already during the war, like Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1917, the Treaty of San Remo, the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920. The British and the French are dividing up the empire. And the Ottoman Empire, by the way, collapses in 1922. It officially ends. It's like just put out of its misery. And emerging from this is the most important player in modern 20th century history of what is modern Turkey is a man by the name of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who was a military commander in the Turkish army, who I guess earned his stripes fighting in Gallipoli, which is a little peninsula that was fought over in World War I with the British and the Turks. Very famous story, Gallipoli. And that's where the Jews also fought, the Zion Mule Corps. And he will basically create, out of that will come the creation in 1923 of the Turkish Republic. And that's the end of the Ottomans, the emergence of the
Which is
attempt to create
basically
Turkey.
what it is today. So basically, Turkey today is a republic, or what the heck is it now?
So he will rule till 1938. And by the way, Ataturk, he does amazing things. He just like Peter the Great, pushes the borders of what is Russia to the west, and Europeanizes the Russian nobility. He makes them like French becomes the court language of Russia. Like we read War and Peace, all the nobility of Russia speaking French. And they have to stop dressing like the traditional dress of the Russian people, more like Europeans. It becomes really like a European court, the architecture, everything, the culture. So too, Ataturk will westernize Turkey. He will de-Islamicize it. He doesn't outlaw Islam, but he secularizes the state. He westernizes the state in
what is
terms of
his
dress.
background, and does it become called Turkey because of his name?
No. It's not become. It's the Ottoman Turkish Empire versus the Turkish Republic or the Republic of Turkey. So the name Turkey stays there. It's just a different form of government. The Ottomans were ruled by a sultan. A sultan was considered one of the leaders of Islam and the ruler of Turkey. There's all the people like Suleiman and Salim and Fatih and all these people are all the sultans. You can go to Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. I've been there. It's really cool. And you can see the harem and the building. It's a gorgeous place. It's a beautiful city, Istanbul. A lot of earthquakes, but very, very cool place. So it goes from a monarchy, an empire with a monarch who's called the Sultan, to now a parliamentary governmental system. And he will become, and so he will be, I believe that he's the first president, I think, at the time, as a prime minister or president. This time I have to check whether, because Turkey had both until Erdogan comes along. So countries have, like France has a prime minister and a president. It's a parliamentary system. But he even changes the alphabet because originally Turkish is written in, we look at alphabets like English is not the alphabet we use in English is Latin. It's Latin. That's why they're called Latin-based languages. And Germanic languages are also written in Latin. Turkey was originally written in Arabic characters. He will change to English characters. So today, if you go to Turkey, everything's written in English, but it's impronounceable and everything's slightly different. But it's basically the English letters, similar, a little slightly different alphabet, some different letters. But everything is to westernize the country, bring it into the fold of the West, secularize it, which again doesn't mean that it's not a Muslim state. It means that Islam plays a secondary role because traditionally Islam, like Judaism, there's no separation of church and state in that halacha, Jewish law, governs everything that is spiritual and temporal. The court system, there's not a separate court system. Like Israel today has a rabbinic courts and a secular court system. So Turkey then adopts a system which is much more westernized. The problem is also the Turkish military is very, very strong. And once he's gone in 1938, there's a series of people who ruled Turkey. I don't know all their names at all, but Turkey will go through whenever there's an attempt, because Islam always tries to poke its head in and reestablish itself. Whenever there's an attempt to become more to the right Islamic wise, like in 1960, 1971, I remember all the years. There was one in the 80s, one in the 90s. There was different military coups. If they didn't like the party that got elected through a democratic election, the army would just come in, remove that guy, reestablish a form of democracy until someone else they didn't like got elected, and then they would remove him again. And this is what was basically going on. And it's during this time, by the way, that Turkey has a very good relationship with Israel. This is when Israel doesn't. Remember, Israel doesn't have any peace treaties with any Arab state until it's Egypt in 1979. But Israel has traditionally had relations with other Islamic states that are not neighbors, that are not necessarily Arabs. like countries like when the Soviet Union falls apart, like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan and places like that. So because Israel's such a small country, you got to leave it just to change your mind. And if you want to practice flying over land in Israel in a fighter plane, you got to turn after 4 minutes. I mean, fighter pilots used to train over Turkish airspace, and there was very close military and strategic cooperation. And by the way, Turkey during the Cold War, because Turkey's right on the border with Russia, Turkey joined NATO in 1952, which is really interesting because NATO
Interesting.
it's the only non-European state. It's the only Islamic country that is part of NATO,
That's fascinating.
as a bulwark. And nuclear weapons are placed there, like where the Turks and the Russians don't
Right.
like that stuff either. It's a great launching pad just as America didn't want, the
Wow.
Russians in Cuba, so that we parked ourselves there. But
So when we come up to
yeah,
basically
yeah.
what's happening now, meaning since October 7th, the where does Turkey stand with all of that? How does it relate to Israel and what is its investment? Does it have a relationship with Syria? What's going on there?
Yeah. So what happened in Turkey is, of course, with the emergence of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's an Islamist, he comes into power as the prime minister in 2003, 2004. And then since I think it's like 2014, first of all, they abolished the office of prime minister in 2018. They went to direct election of the president. This is a great way of consolidating power in one person because until that time, the prime minister and the president will sort of split powers. Israel has a president also, but it's only a figurehead position. The only thing the president really gets to do in Israel is greet ambassadors, be a figurehead person, and also invite whatever party has a majority to form the government after there's an election. But now, really, it's been Erdogan who's been in power is either prime minister or president since 2002, has since 2014, if I'm not mistaken, been the prime minister. He's basically severely curtailed democracy and free political activity in Turkey and freedom of the press. He's done very similar to what Putin has done. Putin went the same. He held both offices, and now he kind of runs. It's very much there's still elections, but he pretty much has control of everything.
I
And
think
he's and he's not only
in 2023 he was elected. I think he was elected president, and it seems like he's centralized all the rules, if I remember correctly.
um, I think he was I think 2000. I think since 2014, he's actually been the president. I think it's earlier. I have to check that,
Oh wow.
but I believe he was first the prime minister from 10 years before, but he's been the president for
Mm,
a really long time. He's like Putin. He's
wow.
been around forever. Like he said that same
Right.
thing like Bibi, but at least Bibi's been really democratically elected.
Right.
Putin like
Right.
destroyed any opposition, but he really pushed. That was, I mean. The great relationship. The other thing, there's an inverse relationship, by the way, historically between the relationship between Israel and Greece and Israel and Turkey. When one goes up, the other goes down. So when Israel and Turkey had great relations, because Greece and Turkey they hate each other. Turkey occupied Greece. And by the way, in 1974, going back to the 16th century, if I'm not mistaken, um, the Turks seized the island of Cyprus at one point when the Ottomans were at the height of their power, like in 1516 or something like that. And Cyprus became an independent country with a Turkish minority in it. And in 1974, I think in the summer of 1974, there was a coup in Cyprus, and the government of Cyprus wanted to merge with Greece and make like one like country. And the Turks invaded and took over the whole northern side of Cyprus, like 40 something percent of it, and in violation of everything. And they hold it until today. So Cyprus is a divided island, and there's a big battle over the Eastern Mediterranean because the Turks are in there, and the Turkish interest is not only naval, but it's also oil and natural gas. So, with the deterioration of the relationship that Israel's had with Turkey since the rise of Erdogan, has led to a massive increase in the positive relationship between Israel and Cyprus. And Israel's doing all these natural gas deals off the coast of Israel and the Mediterranean between developing and pipelines. The, the, the Turks are doing it with Libya in North Africa, which is in the middle of a civil war, and they're sending soldiers and weapons in there to fight and everything. It's all about the politics of the Middle East. And the other thing about Erdogan is, and he's been accused of this, is just like Putin in many ways, in my opinion, is kind of trying to reestablish the Russian Empire because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia shrank dramatically and lost its territory. He kind of longs for the glory days when Turkey controlled the entire Eastern Mediterranean. And that is basically what happened with the Syrian civil war in 2011, for instance. By the way, Erdogan does not like the Assad family at all. They basically back what's called the Syrian National Army, which is this mushmash groups of all these rebels who were fighting Assad. And in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, 2016, 2014, it's hard to keep all these dates straight. Could be 2014. Turkey seized northern Syria because traditionally that's part of the Ottoman Empire. So you see, and by the way, at the same time as the Russians are moving in with the Iranians and supporting Assad to get their fingers in the pie, the Syrians are trying to engulf Israel from all. I mean, the Iranians are trying to engulf Israel from the north and from the Golan Heights and take over there. The Russians are trying to reestablish their presence in the Middle East, which they lost since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And primarily, they wanted to get naval bases in the Mediterranean, which they still sort of have in Latakia. So it's
Where
unbelievable what's going on there.
where does Turkey fall in terms of the Shiite Sunni divide? Like, why wouldn't they align with Assad or Iran, or where do they fall in that whole, look, in a way, we are seeing these are going to be the main teams, right? Shiite and Sunni. Where do they align with Saudi Arabia? How does all of that look, and where does Turkey fall into that?
Again, that's a great question because in the bigger picture of the Middle East, it's not just Arabs, it's Muslims. So like Iran and Turkey are the big players, really some of the biggest players, but neither of them are Arab, but they're both Muslim. The difference being Iran is the center of Shiite power in the world. Shiites are only like 15% of the Islamic world. But Turkey's Sunni. Turkey has a lot of ethnic minorities, by the way. During World War One, for instance, the Turks, the Ottomans, like they forcibly moved and killed over 1 million Armenians. By the way, they did this also in 1917. They expelled, I think it's like 10,000 people from Jaffa and Tel Aviv area, including 8,000 of them were Jews. So they have these minorities in their
Wow.
empire. They have
Right.
a huge Kurdish minority,
Hmm.
like 10 million people or something that they've been fighting. The PK, called the PKK, I think is the Turkish fighting organization. Turkey's been fighting an insurgency with them since the 1970s. So they are dealing with their own minorities internally, but trying to assert themselves into the Middle East in general. Remember, they're the border of the Middle East and gain control over a lot of these territories. Like they have a very vested interest in what's going on in Lebanon and in Syria because they're right across the border from these countries. So there's
So
an
do they
interesting
align
struggle
with
going
Saudi
on.
Arabia because they're Sunni?
Ah, that's about you asked me the question I was about to go to. On one, the biggest struggle that people don't get is the fight between Shiite Islam and Sunni Islam. But the difference is that the Shiites are all centered around Iran, and they're the ones who are backing all these in Iraq and in Syria, and they're even backing things that are not Shiite, like the Alawite regime that is in Syria, that was the Assad family, or even Hamas in Gaza, who are Sunni, but they're aligned with them. But the Hezbollah in Lebanon, these are all the Shiites. But when you talk about Sunni, the big powers are the biggest of all the Sunni Arab states is Egypt, but it's very poor. They have a big army though. Saudi Arabia, huge landmass, not a lot of people, but a lot of money and oil. And Turkey, which is not Arab but Sunni, with a very big army, NATO member, great military, very powerful country that is very aggressively expansionist. So it's kind of they say nature abhors a vacuum, as they say. And because of the instability in the Middle East, everyone is trying to get their finger into the pie. During the Cold War, when it was the U.S. heavily invested in the Middle East, with the Soviet Union heavily invested, there was no room to fill in anything in there. With what's happened in the last number of years, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the U.S. wishy-washy on its and Iran emerging with the Iranian revolution in 1979, everyone is tussling back and forth to get control of what has been going on. And with the Syrian civil war in 2011, with Syria breaking up, the only reason why it survived was basically um, because Russia and Iran, who are strange bedfellows, united to prop Syria up for their own, as I said, geopolitical strategic
So
interests. But now, yeah,
so then wouldn't Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia be a formidable alliance? And why wouldn't they just ally with each other? And I mean, with the money, with the with the NATO connection, and with the military, couldn't they just? it sounds like a formidable alliance in that region.
Well, the only look, that's a great question because they have different interests. They're different. They're not neighbors of each other really. They're like Turkey and Iran are right next to each other,
Right.
but Saudi Arabia is farther away, and Egypt is even further away. So they have their own spheres of influence, and their major interest is to keep danger away from them. And they'd all you're only united by one thing. If Iran were to suddenly go on a massive offensive and start sweeping through the Middle East, which is not going to happen, then they would probably certainly Saudi Arabia and Egypt would come together.
Mm.
But just because they're all Sunni doesn't mean they actually like or agree with each other. That
Got it.
means that their
Okay.
bigger enemy is they have their own interests. It's like this Protestant country in
Mm.
Europe and that Protestant country in Europe. Yeah, they may hate the Catholic countries more, but they have their own interests.
Okay.
So it's
Got
never
it.
that simple. People like to oversimplify these things. But if we fast forward to what's gone on now, first of all, just to go a little bit back to the relationship with Israel in 2010, what happened is with Hamas embedding itself in 2000 and after 2005 in Gaza, Turkey is really snuggled up to Hamas, and Erdogan does not like Israel, and he's really been offering them refuge and allowing them to operate like in Qatar also, and with the Israel has been doing a blockade around Gaza to keep all the weapons from being smuggled in. And remember, in the Mavi Marmara in 2010, they sent this ship in this flotilla, and it was full of radical people. And Israel intercepted it, and commandos boarded the ship with like paint guns, literally. And they ended up getting really violent, and 9 Turkish activists were killed in the fighting because they were stabbing the commandos and things. And Turkey broke off relations with Israel. It really soured after that great relationship we had. And it's been up and down since then. They started to back in 2022. They reestablished the relationship. But Erdogan hates Israel. He only moves towards Israel and there's something in it for him. For instance, like when Donald Trump was president and he saw that Trump was really pro-Israel, he figured it would help Turkey to nuzzle up because everyone knows one of the ways to get into America is to be good to Israel. So he was warming up, but you can't trust the guy. He's an Islamist. He's not. He views Israel as a threat to his expansion because Israel is what keeps the Middle East from falling apart. It's the great stabilizing force because of its military power and its stable, political system. So just when everything was kind of getting good, then boom, October 2023 takes off, and Turkey just goes full throttle against Israel, siding with South Africa and the International Criminal Court to go after Israel and ending trade with Israel and breaking off diplomatic relations again with Israel. And so they negotiated some sort of agreement that I don't know what's happening. It's a mess. But the big winner, Ellie, with what's happened now, with the incredible people don't realize how dramatic the events are, what's happened in the last few months. The Gaza war, it's amazing. Israel going back, 67, took out 3 Arab armies in 6 days, and we're still stuck in Gaza, and they're still launching missiles out of there. It's unbelievable. It's like the most. It's a warren of tunnels. It's impossible. But meanwhile, Israel went and took out Hezbollah. In what I thought was going to be a horribly bloody, horrendous struggle with thousands of missiles hitting Israel and Hezbollah, incredibly well trained, well equipped army, and they collapsed. Unbelievable how quickly. And Syria fell apart literally in less than 2 weeks, like in 10 days. It was overrun. It was unbelievable. So everything shifted, a titanic shift in the Middle East. Israel is now occupying South Lebanon. Israel is now in the Golan Heights and occupying Quneitra and part of that whole area, which it doesn't plan to stay in long term. The big losers in what's gone on now, well, obviously Syria, the Assad regime, which has been in power for a very long time, is now gone. The big winners are the radicals, Al-Golani, Mohammed Al-Golani, where his name is, who's the leader of this coalition of forces. We'll see what happens with that. Russia is a huge loser in this. They still have some military footing, I think, in Latakia, but they lost everything. They put a lot into. They're in no position because they're so strained with Ukraine. The big, big, big winner is Turkey because their nemesis was Assad. Russia's out of the picture now, and they're much more free to operate. And they have embarked on a major offensive against the poor Kurds. And the Kurds are spread out. There's like 35, 40 million Kurds that are spread out between Turkey, Iraq. There's some in Iran. There's some I think there's some in Syria. I'm not even sure where they all are. But America is basically somewhat protecting the Kurds, who they're a very good fighting force. But I'm really afraid for what's going to happen to them. They've been pushed back to the Euphrates River now. But now Turkey is on the move. It's really on the move. and we're in a very precarious situation. We'll see, but things have changed very, very,
So
very
what are
dramatically.
some of the possibilities of what Turkey could potentially do with that freedom and momentum?
Well, a lot depends on what happens in Syria.
Hmm.
Whether Syria stabilizes, whether Syria breaks out a civil war, whether Syria goes on, whether the guy who's now ruling, this guy Golani,
Hmm.
actually turns out I saw him yesterday on the news. He's wearing a suit, looking all Western. He's got his little Islamic beard with a little mustache and a big beard at the bottom.
Hmm.
I think he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. So if he can stabilize and control Syria, then good for him. But he doesn't control the whole country. This U.S. force is still in part of Iraq, and they're still controlling. But if Syria doesn't stabilize, then Turkey is, in my opinion, will probably make a move to get more territory because that's what he would really like to do.
Hmm.
That's his
Interesting.
thing. He's like all great dictators. They got to be on the offense.
Mm. Mm.
Peace doesn't suit totalitarian
Meaning,
regimes very well.
meaning expanding the Turkish empire, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, yeah. It's like
Right.
no, all totalitarian regimes, and really Turkey is, can only stay in power in a state of perceived conflict with an external enemy.
Hmm. Right.
That's like 1984. Remember, like Eurasia's always
Right.
been a war with. Okay, you have to be that way.
Right. As long as
So
you could control the population, saying if we don't stick together, we'll be obliterated, then f fear is the ruling factor. And so it
yeah,
seems like they'll go
the,
after finding new enemies.
but the problem is that Turkey is a member of NATO, and NATO is a bunch of
Right.
basically peaceful European states.
Mm.
So it's a very precarious position that they're in now. Like, what if they're to be, in theory, think about this really weird scenario. Think if Israel wanted Turkey to have direct confrontation. Turkey could call on Article 9 of the
Right.
NATO agreement, which would call on all European states and the US to protect Turkey against Israel. I mean, it's a really far-fetched idea, but in theory, I think the whole NATO thing should be revisited with Turkey and Turkey should be expelled. I don't think that
Right.
they're keeping. There's certain criteria that NATO countries have to have, which is being a democracy, and Turkey really isn't. It suppresses
Hmm.
free speech and free press, and it's a very oppressive country, and it's expansionist and it violates everything. But no one cares what they do, only what Israel does. So it's a
Hmm.
very long history, but yeah, it's still happening. It's unfolding very quickly before our eyes. But I
Cool.
think they want to reestablish the Ottoman Sultanate. I think he wants to be Sultan Erdogan.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so all eyes on Turkey, and let's see what happens there, especially now with the fall of Syria. Okay, anything else that we should know going into, keeping an eye on that situation?
Um, I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of, but no. But I think we're going to see things develop very quickly, whether Turkey stabilizes and whether diplomatic relations return with Israel,
Right.
and whether we can get back to the historically pretty, with the exception of some stuff in World War One, the Neely spy ring and what happened with the expulsion of Jews, and a lot of stuff happened at that when the Ottomans were afraid that the Jews were a disloyal minority in their empire. But otherwise, the relationship was good, and let's hope it continues because a stable Turkey is very good for the world because the whole
Right.
part of the world, from Turkey to the north into the Crimea and the Black Sea, and that whole area of the world is a very unstable part of the world. It seems to
Mhm.
be all the conflict in the world in the West is coming out of there. So it remains to be seen, I guess, what will happen. We'll have to keep our eyes peeled on that part of the world.
Awesome. Okay, you did it. Thousands of years of history in a very short period of time. Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you again, as always, Rabbi Kinspiro. If you have questions on this topic or any other topic like it, please feel free to leave us a comment. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a place to leave leave reviews, leave questions. Same on Apple. Please like, share, subscribe. You can also join us on the YouTube channel for all of our episodes, where you can also leave a comment, or you can get in touch with us in the liner notes. We always love to hear your suggestions and your questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Rabbi Sparrow.
Thank you.